evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Um, this is a highly anticipated event that UK Cooperative Extension is hosting. We are addressing a timely topic that requires several different subject matter experts. We have come together to hopefully answer some of your burning questions, the things that you've been wondering, addressing living life with alpha-gal syndrome. My name is Heather Norman Bergdorf. I am an associate professor and extension specialist for food and nutrition at the University of Kentucky. I'm in the Department of Dietetics and Human Nutrition. I am one of your presenters for tonight. I'll be facilitating our time together, but I'm also joined by some other people who have expertise outside of me, and that is we have some entomology friends with us as well. We're joined by Dr. Jonathan Larson and Dr. Hannah Tiffin. Both of them are assistant professors and entomologists within the Department of Entomology here at UK, as well as Heather Shaw. She is an area agent within the UK Nutrition Education Program within Family Consumer Sciences Extension. So this is truly a team effort. When they present, they will jump in, unmute, and introduce themselves. But for now, I will get our conversation started. So I see that our participant attendee list number keeps ticking up. We have a few housekeeping pieces that I do want to address before we really jump into the content. This topic we're talking about tonight, it's overwhelming for some. It causes fear in other people. There's a lot of emotions that are tied to it. A lot of people here tonight might just be curious, something that they've heard about, maybe from someone at work. Uh, you may have AGS, you may have a loved one. You might have just heard about it yesterday or registered for this 30 minutes ago. Regardless, we believe that there is something here tonight for everyone. We have a large number of people who have registered. We have many, many counties right now that are participating with live watch parties that are participating. And this just speaks to the importance and relevance of the topic across Kentucky. So before we move forward, I do want to lay some ground rules because we have a large group that's been pulled together. First of all, this is purely educational. In no way do we want you to use this as medical advice or for any type of self-diagnosis or any type of treatment. We are strongly encouraging you to consult a qualified healthcare provider for any medical concerns or any decisions that you hope to make based on this information. We want you to be more informed and feel better equipped to have conversations about your health and strategies that you can put into place to protect your health and the health of loved ones around you. Next, we are going to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. So you will see on your Zoom webinar, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. That is how you can submit questions to us. We do have time blocked off at the end after our presentation to address those. Those will go to us, the hosts and panelists, so that we can see those. I will be monitoring that and facilitating that Q&A. So as you have those questions, feel free to submit them there. If you are at an in-person watch party at your county office, you can follow the guidance from the county staff that you have there and how to submit questions that you might have. Something that's not listed on this slide is that we might mention websites, products, just things that are relevant when it comes to AGS management and prevention. I just want to share that we don't necessarily see that as an endorsement. We're just providing ideas and suggestions that might be helpful for you, and you can explore if that is a good choice for you and your needs. And then finally, we are recording this session. For those who registered, we will be following up with an email next week that includes a recording and all of the reference resources that we are going to share and talk about. If you are at an event in person, you most likely are going to be handed those resources as you walk out the door tonight. So everybody will have access and get those resources that we discuss. Here's a roadmap of what we're going to cover today, just so that you kind of know what to expect. Again, our presenters are going to jump in when it's their time to share their expertise on a specific aspect of AGS and its relevance to prevention and management. We're going to start off the night hearing a personal story. We're going to bring it home and share, we understand how challenging this is because people we know and love also are living with this condition. We're going to build some foundational knowledge about just AGS Basics. We're going to look at symptoms, risk factors, and diagnosis. I'll step back in and kind of talk about the nutrition and lifestyle management, the implications and considerations you need to think when you're making food choices and lifestyle choices. We're going to end the night with tick bite prevention because really this just boils down to preventing a tick for the onset or subsequent tick bites in the future. And so our entomologist friends are going to jump back in and talk about tick bite prevention strategies. Then we'll close out all of our time together with that Q&A session. So, uh, us specialists, we love to talk, but we want to be sure that you still feel engaged during this webinar because it's hard to have that reciprocity here. So we're going to use something called Mentimeter tonight. This is a platform where you can be engaged in real time in an anonymous way. So we can't see who you are. You can be open and honest and share with us. It does not require an app. You do not have to download anything. Essentially, if you're on a computer, you can open up another browser, type in menti.com, use this code. That's going to give you access to this presentation, and you're going to be able to interact in real time. If you have a smartphone or a tablet laying nearby, use that QR code. You can scan it. Don't take a picture. Hold your camera up. You'll see a link that pops up. Click that link, and it will connect you to this presentation. And you're going to be able to kind of follow along in real time, responding to some questions, giving us some feedback, just so that you feel like you're engaged and a part of this conversation that we're having. I'm going to give you, we've got people, they're joining slowly but surely. I'm going to give you a few more seconds, and no worries, you'll have the ability to still join later on using menti.com and the code. If you may have participated in another extension program that's used Mentimeter in the past. I know Big Blue Book Club, if you've participated in any of those, they use Mentimeter, but we would love for you to get connected. You don't have to, no requirement here, but this is just kind of a fun way for you to feel connected. While people are joining, I just want to reiterate, we've had lots and lots of people who have joined since we started. The Q&A is open for you to submit questions directly to us hosts and panelists. And then the chat feature is available, but the chat will only go to hosts and panelists. So that is a way that we can see you can engage with us, but there aren't really any opportunities for attendees to engage together. So here, a few more seconds, we'll get you connected to Mentimeter, and we're going to move on to our first question. Okay, again, no requirement, no expectation. Your responses here using Mentimeter are completely anonymous. And yes, all attendees are muted and video off. All right, so you still have menti.com. The code is at the top if you still want to join us. I want to know where you're joining us from. Let's give this a shot. We want to see where people are. You can pin or select a spot on the map to kind of give us an idea of our reach across the state. If you are joining us from outside Kentucky, I think we actually have quite a few. Feel free to pin yourself outside of the map just to kind of give us an idea. I'm sorry, I don't have a regional map or the surrounding states. But yeah, let us know. I think we're going to have a handful of people who are from outside Kentucky. So we pretty much are covering the entire Commonwealth. We need someone in Pike County. Looks like this kind of also gives us an idea of the reach as far as the number of actual counties that are represented and participating. Yes, so Menti code, if you go to menti.com, you can still join us, 27279172. I just saw someone put Lexington, South Carolina in the chat. So Lawrence County, Grayson County, we are all over the place. All right, just a few more seconds. All right, well, that's fun. Thank you. Let's give this next question a shot. Are you living with AGS? So this is helpful for us to know who is in this virtual room with us as we present, the context in which we can share information, how we frame the information that we're sharing so that it is most relevant to you. This really just gives us an idea of to know what the audience needs to know. So the options, yes, I have AGS. No, but someone close to me does. No, I am just here to learn. And it looks like a lot of people here are living with AGS, and a lot of people are here that are curious, and a lot of people here know someone. So really, this is impacting all of you in different ways. Menti.com 27279172. Thank you for sharing. You can see the number of respondents we've also had, and those numbers just keep going up. So over 100 people here are living with AGS. All right, and we have one more before we actually can get to the presentation. So what do you hope to learn during this webinar? I'm going to give you just a minute to kind of share any quick thoughts you have. This is open-ended, so you can add a few more words, give a little bit of context. What do you want to learn about? And I will say that we're going to do our best to address as much as possible, but it's absolutely impossible for us within this time together to answer and meet all of your needs. This is actually super informative for us on campus to see what is it people actually have questions about, what they want to learn about as we think about the future resources and programming that we create to address your needs. So yes, the chat is open. People are submitting. If you're not connected to Menti, you can submit in there. That will go to us. Um, no way we can filter through all this right now. This is, again, super helpful for us after this to go back and see where do we need to fill gaps? Where do we need to build out additional resources? Working on a cure. That was one that I just saw scroll by. So I'll give you just a couple more seconds and we're going to keep moving along. Thank you so much for being intentional, being open with us, and sharing with us what you need. All right. So I'm sorry if you weren't able to get that in. We do want to move on just to be mindful of time. Thank you for your engagement so far. We will have some additional opportunities as we move through the presentation. So be sure you keep that internet browser open or that smartphone or tablet close by. So when we started promoting this webinar, it got a lot of traction on social media. There were lots of shares, lots of comments. And as we were pulling together the information for this, one of the comments that really stood out to us was that someone commented they really hoped that the presenters understood what it was like to live with AGS, and not just being talked at, but that it actually was practical and realistic and understood what reality could look like for someone. And so tonight, one of our presenters, Heather Shaw, is actually going to share her personal story with us about AGS. And I'll be completely honest and say that she is probably one of the main reasons that we're actually here tonight. She has been such a strong advocate, using her voice and knowledge and experience to help a lot of people across the state. She's done a lot of state level or county level presentations on the topic. And really, she has helped us on campus realize that we need to address this at a broader level. And so that's why we're here. So she's going to share with us her experience and let us know, let you all know that we do hear you. We do have people close to us, and that we have framed this whole evening around that. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Heather, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Um, so I want to start by saying I'm only one person with alpha-gal. And I realize that all of you out there who have alpha-gal could each tell your own unique story because it's a different journey for each one of us. So my journey will have some similarities probably to yours, if you have it, but it won't necessarily work in order. It's a zigzag path, and things that you're triggered by are different. Your symptoms, your reactions may be different than mine. Timelines look different for each person. So the thing about alpha gal is it's really tricky to pin down, right? So if you probably know this, if you've talked to several people with alpha gal, or if you have it yourself and you've talked to anybody else with it, it's a little bit different for everyone. Although we're all allergic to the alpha gal carb, it works a little differently person to person. Just starting off by saying that. But I'm going to tell you about my personal journey with it, and I believe it started way before my diagnosis, to be honest. I was diagnosed in 2015, and luckily, I was one of those lucky rare few, I feel like, that did not have to wait years and years for a test. Um, my first symptoms, though, started in 1994. So way back, I'm not going to tell like how old I am, but I was in high school at the time. And in 1994, I broke out in hives on my wrist, matching hives, one on each wrist. And we went to the doctor at that time, and she asked the normal questions. Have you changed your body wash, or you changed your shampoo, your soap, things like that that had touched my skin. And my mom and I couldn't come up with anything that was different, and so we went on with life. Throughout my high school life, it was up and down with reactions. I would have some days I would get up and I would just be full blown body hives, full blown. My back would mass into one solid hive. Sometimes there would be so many. Sometimes I couldn't go to school. Sometimes I would just have to stay home, or I'd go to school and I'd just start breaking out all over hours after I'd been in school. There was no way to like figure out what the trigger was because I didn't feel like I was doing anything different. My doctor at the time did not consider a food allergy. Of course, this is the 90s. We didn't know about alpha-gal. And so she did not consider that it even could be a food allergy. And so basically, I just dealt with it. I took like diphenhydramine, which is, um, a generic, a Benadryl, in other words, a Benadryl version, and I would just hope for the best. And then it got to where it was also swelling my lips up in my on my mouth. So I tried to hold down a job and go to school, and unexpectedly, some days I would just get like huge lip swelling, and again would try to work and do my life, but it was just random. There was no rhyme or reason that I could ever figure out. That happened for about 4 or 5 years. And then I had a good spell of several years where I didn't really have any reaction that I could pinpoint. And then I had maybe a sick stomach when I would eat certain foods. I always thought it was just, oh, that meat was greasy. That made me sick at my stomach. Everybody does that, right? No big deal. Didn't worry about it. In 2014, I went with a group of girlfriends out to eat, and we ate like some cheeseburgers and some really yummy food. It was super greasy and good. And shortly, a few hours into the night, sure enough, I started swelling. And so not only with alpha-gal did I have hives, but I had tissue swelling. So sometimes, and still get like, sometimes I'll have like swelling in my face or my inside my mouth. And so my lips popped up and swelled up, and then in my face, I started having swelling. And one of the girls I was with was a nurse, and she was like, have you ever been tested for food allergies? And this is like 2014. And I was like, no, I've not, I don't think I have food allergies. I mean, I just get hives. I just swell sometimes. It's probably something I've been around. And she said, that really looks like a food allergy reaction to me because, um, that's kind of how it goes with a food allergy. Like it affects your face or your mouth like that. And so I decided to take her seriously after a little bit, and I went and got in with an allergist. He tested me. He said he would test me for all kinds of food allergies, and I've never even heard of alpha-gal, but he said he'd run that too. So I don't know anything about it. So of course I agreed to whatever he thinks needs testing. And sure enough, on a Friday afternoon, he personally himself called me and said, well, you are negative. You don't have any food allergies except alpha-gal. And I was like, okay, what is that? And he said, you can't eat anything with hooves, that's a mammal, so you can't eat beef, pork, maybe watch your dairy. And he was like, don't eat any cheeseburgers this weekend. Have a good weekend. And he hung up the phone. And there I was. And so at that point, it was overwhelming. It was terrifying. If you have been diagnosed with alpha-gal, you know what I'm saying. Like, I think I felt every negative emotion possible. It was scary. It was confusing. It was frustrating. There was no support. Of course, this is 2015. It was just kind of a brand new-ish thing in the medical world. And no one that I knew had it. I had never heard of it. The doctor didn't give me any referrals to find out more about it. So I had to start digging in on my own and doing my own research the best I could and trying to talk to as many people as I could to see if anybody else knew what this was. And so what I did was just I did what he said. So I just removed red meat. And my hives and my tissue swelling did go away. And it went well for a little bit. And then about 3 or 4 years later, I start breaking out in hives again, and I notice I'm also having bloating issues, stomach issues, which I had never had tied with it before. So I'm having that. And I thought, maybe I don't know what else to do. Maybe I should cut the dairy out. because I really, it's really hard to function and do your life if you're constantly having, an allergy reaction. And so I didn't want to pop an allergy pill every day to survive. So I did it. I cut the dairy out. And in fact, it was probably the dairy because soon enough my skin, it took me probably a few weeks actually to resolve that with my skin. I had hives for a while. But the bloating that I had probably had off and on all my life, gone when I cut that out for me. So apparently dairy was bothering me. And it doesn't bother everyone with alpha gal, but it was me. And that's just kind of how I knew because once I restricted it, I didn't have a symptom. I didn't have that symptom anymore. And so with every step I took, I kept feeling like, okay, I'm getting the control of this. I've got control of this. I can just cut this out. No big deal. And sometimes little things would pop up though. For example, um, so I have had a experience with cross contamination. So I ate at the Waffle House one night. I'm all about some. It's telling on myself tonight, I guess, all about some yummy food. But I got like whatever was safe. I thought was chicken or turkey or some version of something, or maybe just like whatever wasn't straight pork or beef. And I later woke up so sick. I have never had such bad stomach cramps. Intestines felt like they were going to explode. And I thought about it. I was like, well, about 6, 7 hours ago, I ate that Waffle House meal with no red meat, no dairy that I know of. It's the only thing it had to be was the surface that it was cooked on. So then I got, to where I started watching what restaurants I could go out to eat in. And if you've been out with me before, if we've eat out, you probably know I have like two safe restaurants that I now go to. Everywhere else is just for me, it feels very risky because I don't like the feelings that it could cause. It's very likely going to make me really sick in the middle of the night. So it's not worth it for me. So usually when I go out now, I'll eat beforehand or I will bring my own food to the place that we're meeting up and I will have my safe food there. You just have to do whatever works. So anyway, we're going along and it's 2028, 2015, 16, 17. So 2019 rolls around. We go to bed. My 11-year-old son wakes me up at about midnight and he says, Mom, I'm itching really, really bad. And I look at him and his palms of his hands are red and he says, and his feet are itching to death. And then I look and he's starting to get little bitty dots. My hives are always like quarter size or bigger. He's got tiny little pinprick size red dots starting on his trunk of his body. And then he grabs his stomach and he's like, I'm going to be sick. And he went to the bathroom and he was like, my stomach's cramping so bad I can't do anything, but my stomach is cramping up. And so he continues to break out with hives. So we wrap him up in a blanket. He's 11, but like he starts shivering and he's like, I just have a bad feeling. And even though I felt like I can kind of had a handle on what my triggers were and how I reacted, there's nothing worse in the whole entire world than feeling like you can't control something's going on with one of your babies and you have no power to stop it. Like you don't know, no. Um, for once, I said luckily I had alpha gal, and I don't mean that lightly. Like if I had not had alpha gal myself and my son had woke up like that, I mean, I would have been clueless. I said, "What did you have to eat and drink if you last meal you had?" He said, "I had cheeseburgers," and I said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." So I gave him. I knew then it rang a bell with me. I was like, "Let's go ahead and go to the hospital." So we gave him Benadryl, and my husband and I drove him to our emergency room. He did not progressively get any worse. He had no breathing issues, no chest tightness, no swelling of the face, nothing like that. But I did have an EpiPen with me, and I would have done it immediately if any of that had happened. But we just watched him. I had him lay down in the car, and I just watched him and kept talking to him to make sure he could breathe okay, and it wasn't sounding hoarse or anything. We got to the ER, and when they looked at him, by that time his hives were almost completely resolved and gone. So the Benadryl had done its job, and he had um, gotten what he needed out of that. So his body was happy. But that was terrifying. And at that point, when I talked to them and I told them his symptoms, and they said, we're not going to test him tonight, but you go ahead and take him to your allergist. And so we did. And I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that he was diagnosed with alpha gal about 2 months after that. So suddenly I had an 11-year-old with it. Um, unfortunately, that's not the end of that story. So I'm managing him with his alpha gal. About 6 months later, my daughter starts complaining. I noticed she's 9 at that time, starts complaining that every time she eats like pork or hot dogs or like especially fatty meats like a hot dog, but pork in general, she's not a big meat eater, but when she would eat something like bologna or a hot dog, she would say, "My stomach, I mean, it just blah, it just feels bad. It's yucky. My stomach doesn't feel good." That was her thing, was like her stomach was all gastrointestinal. And I said, that's your only thing. It's probably not alpha gal. Probably not. But since your brother has it, I have it. So let's go ahead and check you since it only happens when you're eating a few hours. It was for her, it was about 3 or 4 hours, a little bit quicker after you're eating, like some pork. And yeah, she came back positive for alpha gal as well. So her other biggest symptom that we finally realized was her joint pain. And so that's something that we don't have a lot of research on at this point. We don't, it's more anecdotal. But joint pain is for real an issue with alpha gal, some with alpha gal. And so it definitely was with her. And so we've just learned to be label detectives. We are very careful about what we put into our bodies, but also just like what we like wool dryer balls and things like that touches our skin. We could have itchy reactions. Um, it's kind of crazy all the ways that it can affect you. But for sure, it's different for everybody, and that's just kind of what we've been through. I'm happy to say that my son is in remission now, so there's hope. Like he's good, and he's been good for I don't know, like 4 years. He's been in remission. Um, and so he eats anything that he wants, and so far so good. Um, my daughter's my daughter does not ever want to eat red meat again. She still does dairy and still has joint pain. And I honestly believe it's alpha gal, but she does, it's her choice to not give that up. And she knows that. And so I just leave it up to her. And then myself, I'm kind of like her. I don't want to eat red meat again. If I were to ever get to bring something back, if I ever get to test zero, I'm bringing the dairy back. Like I miss the cheese, seriously. And it's funny because I just got my yearly recheck results today. And so my number, I'm so tickled to death. My number is the lowest it's been since 2015, and the allergist is like very hopeful. So I'm at like, I started out like in the 50s with my number. Not that it's necessarily tied to it, but there's something, if you're zero, it is tied to it. So I'm working my way to zero. If I don't get a tick bite. That's the key. And so today it's down to 2.4. So it's never been that low in my whole life, like ever. It's always pretty high in the teens, at least ever since then. So I'm hoping for a tick-free summer, but who knows? So there is hope with some remission, and hopefully I'm heading there myself. So happy to share that with you all.
Thank you so much for taking the time to kind of share and being open and honest. Um, Heather brought the content home, and now we're going to start to continue to build your foundational knowledge and skills related to AGS. I'm going to hand it off now to one of our extension entomologists, Jonathan Larson, to provide some AGS basics. I will say I see all the questions that are flowing in. Hopefully, several of them will be addressed as we discuss, and we'll try to address some of them in the Q&A directly. But Jonathan, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. I'm excited to talk a little bit about how the ticks and the alpha-gal syndrome situation are linked. This is going to be based on our best current understanding of how these two things work together to create this situation. For me, it's important to stress that because this is kind of a constantly evolving thing. There's new research happening all the time. And I also will say I'm just a humble country entomologist. I am not an allergist. I am not a genetic scientist or anything like that. And so this is our understanding of what this situation looks like. Ticks are very common ectoparasites. They feed on the outside of lots of different animals here in the state of Kentucky and across the nation. And when they're doing that, they're sucking blood out. And normally, when we talk about ticks and tick-borne problems, we're talking about them picking up a virus, and then they're able to move that virus from one animal to another. You've heard about this with Rocky Mountain spotted fever, things like bourbon virus. There's bacteria involved, things like Lyme disease. And when that happens, they're vectoring that. With this, it's a little different. They're feeding on these animals, And as they feed, they're ingesting that blood and they're getting this alpha galactose sugar molecule stuck in their mouth. When this is happening, they're going to take that blood meal, then sort of molt or be prepared to mate after that. And if they take another blood meal after getting this stuck in their mouth, they are then possibly going to spread it from one animal to another. The reason this is an issue for us is when we talk about humans and monkeys, we are the only mammals that don't actually have this sugar molecule inside of us. So when they feed on a deer, on a mouse, on a bear, or what have you, they are possibly going to get alpha galactose, and then they can bite us and inject that into our bloodstream. So this tick bite now instantaneously is transferring alpha gal to you. Once this happens, your body may mount an immune response. It may think that this is some sort of invader that it needs to do something for. And so as a result, your body may mount this immune response. And if you are just having this sort of bloodborne, there's not going to be a big problem. But then the next time that you ingest mammalian products or things that contain sort of derived mammalian products, the alpha gal may still be present in those. And then it enters your digestive tract. And if you're sensitized after that first exposure, there can be this allergic response, which, as we've heard from Heather and some others, can vary in its intensity. It can vary in its presentation. But this is where the body has perceived this molecule as a threat. And so now you are having an allergic reaction. On our next slide, we can talk about kind of the history and the global presentation of alpha-gal syndrome. This is a long and winding road. Hearing Heather's story about when she first experienced her symptoms, and then the questions that arose later on, and then the discovery that occurred in the 2015 timeframe, it all kind of matches up with what you would read about in a lot of the primary literature. If you go back far enough, there is some evidence that people down in Georgia had maybe had an inkling about what became known as alpha-gal as far back as 1989 and 1990. There was a scientific presentation back then about some tick-borne or tick situations, tick bites that led to potential red meat allergic symptoms, but there wasn't a lot of follow-up at that point. It wasn't really until the early 2000s when there was a drug trial that was coming out. It was an anti-cancer drug called, I always almost say it wrong, cetuximab. Cetuximab, it was being administered to people in trials, and the trials were mostly done in the northeast of the US, where the main tick that's involved with alpha-gal isn't really very common. But there were also some cases or some trials in the southern US, and a lot of the people in the southern US reacted strongly to cetuximab, and then it just started spinning out more and more over the 2004 to 2006 period that the alpha-gal molecule was present in this medication. They started to deduce that the people were reacting to it. Then they started noticing more people were dealing with this, finding more people that were having this allergic reaction, and then linking it to the tick. And this all happened right in that time frame. So kind of the late aughts or the early 2010s was when a lot of these linkages were made. And from there, science and medicine have been trying to play catch up because it's clear that this has been something that's been going on for a while, something that we're trying to better understand. In 2009, there were 12 cases that had been identified. We're now nearing about 500,000 suspected cases. On average, there's 15,000 new cases being reported each year. This is probably not representative of the true situation. This isn't a mandatory report for physicians to do. And so we're probably not getting the complete picture from doctors. There are some doctors that are doing above and beyond their expected duty and are reporting this to the CDC. And as more awareness spreads among healthcare providers, I think this will happen more and more, and that will be best for everybody, helpful for everybody. If we look globally, this is a very interesting situation because it's not just one tick. Here we talk mostly about the Lone Star tick, which we'll talk more about here in a second. But there are 8 different tick species that have been reported as carriers around the world. Interestingly, a lot of these are part of the genus Ixodes. Ixodes is the genus that also includes the black-legged tick or the deer tick, which does live here in Kentucky. It had not been associated with alpha-gal during all of this, but there has been one confirmed case in New England. There was a spread from a black-legged tick to one person with alpha-gal syndrome. For the most part, though, we've had problems in a different genus, the Amblyona genus. And so that means that things could change here in the near future. We may see other ticks that start to become a problem with this. The other problem that we see with this is it's everywhere except Antarctica, and I'm sure that's just a matter of time before somebody travels as a scientist there and has it, and then they get to report it from there. When we talk about what ticks look like in the state, my colleague Dr. Tiffin will probably talk a little bit more about this, but the Lone Star tick is the number one tick, and if we go to the next picture, we'll see that tick down there. It is probably becoming more common in Kentucky thanks to that last bullet on the last slide, which was about deer populations being on the rise, mouse populations being on the rise. This tick has been able to move into the state more over the last couple of decades and supplant the American dog tick as our most common tick. Almost every tick sample that gets sent to our department turns out to be one of these. I would say it's very rare that we get a dog tick and slightly more common to get a deer tick, but this one is the King Kong tick of all of them. We get quite a few samples of these. Right now, you would be finding the nymphs and the adults. So you can see them in the picture down there. One of the things I'll say about this tick is it's rounder than the other tick species you may be exposed to, particularly as a larva and as a nymph. Their body has more of a circular shape. They also have longer mouth parts. And if you use that tick encounter resource that's highlighted in the corner of that picture with the ticks, you can see some images there of the engorgement process because they do change color and look quite different with that. But they're kind of a light brown color. As adults, the male has no discerning characteristics, but the female, she has that white dot on her back that gives the species their name. Those will be present right now up until June. The larvae are more common from July into November. Those are the little tiny six-legged ticks that you see down there in the bottom. Those are often called seed ticks or turkey ticks here in the state of Kentucky, or turkey mites. These are the ones that if you're on a trail, you'll sometimes take a step off the trail and you'll get kind of a tick bomb that explodes on you. You'll have dozens of these on you, each plugging in to feed. As far as we know, those larvae aren't going to be able to give you alpha-gal. As far as we understand it right now, the tick does have to feed and get a blood meal to pick up alpha-gal, and those larvae shouldn't have done that when they're feeding on you. The reason that we point out this tick is because it's the one that's been associated with the most diagnosed AGS cases. The states with the most of these ticks have the most cases of AGS. It follows the sort of geographic distribution of this tick. And for us in Kentucky, I like to point out that we are in the top 10 states for the highest number of cases, and one of our counties, Muhlenberg County, has the second highest number of cases in the nation per million people. I don't think that they'll be putting that on the Welcome to Muhlenberg County sign at the county line, but it is important to point out that this is a hotbed. Kentucky is one of the states that is really, really active in this situation, and that means that we wanted to be proactive and provide a webinar like this. So just some of the basics about what we're dealing with, how the tick picks it up, and how they move it into humans. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Norman Bergdorf to get us into our next section.
Yes. Before we move forward, I'm really curious, and this is anonymous, and it's okay if you say no to this question. Again, this is helpful for us to know if we need to build out additional resources that help with tick identification across the state. So, do you feel comfortable identifying a Lone Star tick if you were to see one, or to know if you pull a tick off, what it is, which type it is? Just take a quick second, give us some feedback, because this is definitely something that we can provide additional support for through extension. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're gonna move into kind of the physical experience. Heather shared quite a bit about this in her story. She's gonna take, I'm gonna say, the next 4 or 5 minutes to kind of help us walk through a few more important highlights related to symptoms, risk factors, and diagnosis. I think this is going to address a lot of questions that I'm seeing in the chat. And as you listen to these next few slides, I want to encourage you to see if you can pick up on a theme or a trend that is consistent throughout these certain aspects of diagnosis. So, Heather.
Okay, can you still hear me okay?
You're good.
Okay. So when we think about alpha-gal, the first question that comes to mind is, am I at risk? And so who is actually at an increased risk? Well, understandably, those who spend a lot of time outdoors, whether for work-related purposes or for hobbies and fun and recreation, would be at increased risk because, like Jonathan was telling us, they're at an increased risk for tick bites. And those of us in Kentucky, we live in areas with large amounts of Lone Star ticks, so we are at a greater risk for this. Adults seem to be at a greater risk than children. We don't know really if it's overlooked or underdiagnosed in kids at this point, and more research is definitely needed. But that's where the cases lie, is heavily on the adult side. And then the last thing to think about is those without a B antigen in their blood type. So the B blood type, it's said to look, the epitope for B looks like a whole lot like the alpha gal epitope. They're very similar in structure, so it's thought that once alpha gal enters the bloodstream for someone that has that B in their blood type, it may not recognize that alpha gal as an invader because it looks like its own self, like it looks like its blood type. And so they may have some protection. So, those, in other words, if you don't have a B in your blood type, you could be at an increased risk of developing alpha gal syndrome. And what we want to know, so what is the connection still between alpha gal syndrome and previous or current food and insect allergies? And we also question what are other we're still exploring what other common predictors are out there. And I did forget to say, Heather, on that first one, that farmers and hunters and forestry workers do report really high incidence of alpha gal syndrome. In fact, more than twice of the general population. So with alpha gal reactions, and I did hit quite a bit on this, I feel like, with when I was talking about it, but our leading researchers in alpha gal tell us that alpha gal is known to be consistently inconsistent, if that's helpful. So what we do know is the lack of consistency is almost a hallmark for the diagnosis of alpha gal or for the discovery that you might have alpha gal. It's why you would continue to explore it, because you may have reactions sometimes, but not every time. And that's very common across the board with alpha gal. And so it's important to remember, first of all, that not every bite, even from a Lone Star tick, not every bite will cause you to become allergic or go on to develop alpha gal syndrome. In fact, only right now, there's a small study, it's ongoing, but right now the estimates show about 5 to 10% of people that who are bit with Lone Star ticks actually go on to develop alpha gal syndrome. So it's a pretty low number. So we're not trying to scare everybody, just make you aware, but it's a pretty low number according to the data right now that we have. Symptoms do appear delayed, which is different from what you think of for a normal like food allergy. So 3 to 8 hours is a normal time after you're exposed to alpha gal. Reactions could occur after multiple bites. Like in some cases, people are bitten multiple times before they have alpha gal. In other cases, it just takes the once. So it's different for different people. And remember, you may not react every time you're exposed. And also remember that each exposure could cause you to have different symptoms. And so for me, for example, I have had reactions to like being in the house with somebody, again, me eating all this good stuff, frying up bologna, and like the fumes of the pork cooking near my face will cause me to start flushing and have some kind of an issue. That never happens normally if I ingest it. That's not one of my symptoms. So different symptoms, different exposures. Um, so what are the symptoms that we're looking for? Most people have hives and itchy skin. That's the most common symptom out there, with about 70% or more people experiencing that. And swelling, like I have tissue swelling, usually in my face. I've also had swelling in my hands and other things of actual tissue, angioedema. 3 out of 4, so a whole lot of people also experience abdominal cramping and GI symptoms. So like nausea, vomiting, that kind of thing, which is, it's not nothing. Okay, that's pretty unpleasant. I've been there and it's excruciating with the GI thing. So it not to be dismissive of that at all. That's huge. Another symptom is shortness of breath and difficulty breathing. That's a pretty serious one. You could also experience, just like when we're thinking toward anaphylaxis here. So that usually goes into a drop of blood pressure, which could cause you to faint or feel dizzy or faint. That's food allergy, classic food allergy toward anaphylaxis symptoms. Joint pain is the one my daughter has a lot of. And then just remember that your symptoms can be different every time you're exposed. I also want to say there is a variant of alpha gal that only is GI. And so for about 20% of people who only have repeated GI issues, they have pains and cramps and nausea or diarrhea, they may, get overlooked for an alpha-gal test because maybe their doctor is thinking, like you're thinking IBS or Crohn's or something. So you're going through all these other tests before you might think about alpha-gal. So it's really possible that you could just have GI. And it's also true with children. The children that we have the data on, their number one symptom is actually just GI. And so, yeah, it also depends on your exposure. And so if you eat it, you're delayed a reaction. But if you are injected with it in the form of that cetuximab that he mentioned, or heparin or something like that, that has the alpha-gal in the medication, we see rapid reaction time with that because it's put straight into your blood rather than eating it. And so you will react quicker. I just want to point that out. All right. And so reactions can be from mild for some people to very severe to even life-threatening to even anaphylaxis in extreme cases. Um, and it's interesting that in the Southeast, the number one cause of adult anaphylaxis from a food allergy is now alpha-gal. So a whole lot of this is happening. About 60% of AGS people that have AGS will have anaphylaxis at some point. So not to be taken lightly. It is a real risk and a real possibility. Even if you feel like you dabble in some things that are kind of risky, like some red meat from time to time, just know that that's always a possibility. That's always out there. Right now, the severity is not known to be linked to any other childhood allergies or current allergies. And like we said, it's less likely to be present. It's less likely to present severe symptoms if you have the B in your blood type. The diagnosis, like we said, can be challenging because of course, if the reactions are not consistent, it may take a little while. And the reaction time, that one of the studies that we looked at recently, it's been maybe a 3-year-old study now. So I feel like it's a little bit quicker. But at that time that study was done, there was a 7-year delay from the start of people reporting their symptoms until they were diagnosed, which is just not okay. That's a lot of scary nights and a lot of suffering and a lot of worry. But I feel like we're coming along, and hopefully more awareness and talk just like these will help people to get diagnosed quicker. There is a blood test that is done for alpha-gal. It's an alpha-gal IgE test, and so that's what you should discuss with your allergist or your doctor. And just know that just ask for that alpha-gal IgE test, and it's not the long word that I probably can't pronounce correctly there, but it's not any of those. That's a different test. That's not it. It's just straight up alpha-gal IgE blood test. But if you talk to your allergist and you tell them what you're thinking and what your experiences are, they're going to know what you're talking about. With alpha-gal, this is always interesting because the thing is, some people have said, sometimes I can eat something, I can eat dairy, or I can even eat a little bit of red meat and nothing happens. And other times I do have a reaction. What's up with that? Probably what's up with that could be what we think of as a cofactor. So in the world of food allergies, cofactors are a familiar term with allergists. And they are things that occur in your environment that may increase the severity of a reaction. And so we're going to talk about that. So first of all, your highest risk things when you're talking about alpha-gal would be at the top of this chart and then working its way downward. And so beef, pork, organ meat is the top riskiest, followed by dairy, including my favorites, milk and cheese, all the way toward the bottom of that list, which would be things that contain gelatin because gelatin is normally animal derived. On the other side of this, we have medications that are high risk. That cancer drug he mentions up here at the top. Things that contain gelatin are in here. Antivenoms are in here. If you have heart valves that are sourced from bovine or porcine heart valves, they come from a mammal, so that can be a risk. All these things you've got to talk to your doctor and let them know you have alpha-gal and see what to do to mitigate that risk. Gelatin containing vaccines are also on there as well as heparin. But the bottom, you're going to see what I'm talking about when I say cofactors. So if just because you haven't reacted, it may be that you're not, having severe reactions because you've never had a cofactor present. And so they make that threshold for having a reaction lower than it would be. So for example, if you go for a run and then you grab a burger, you're more likely to have a reaction and that could be more severe. And normally we're not thinking of grabbing burgers if we have alpha-gal, but I do talk to people that still feel like that they're okay with it and it's not really affected them too strongly. But I do want to caution that if any of the cofactors are present, which are NSAIDs, NSAIDs would be like aspirin, ibuprofen, naproxen, any kind of exercise where you're doing some cardio or having a drink or two, having some alcohol, those will likely increase your risk of having a reaction, and then that reaction could be more severe.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heather. So here is my kind of quiz for what she shared with us. What is the most consistent aspect of timing symptoms and severity when it comes to AGS? Is it that it's always GI related? It's easy to be diagnosed? Absolutely not. This is 100%. Everybody gets an A. It's the inconsistencies. That's really, like she mentioned, kind of the hallmark of when it doesn't seem to make sense. This might actually be something that we should start to think about. So, yes, the inconsistency in symptoms, the timing, the severity, the presence of cofactors, that all is very, very common within AGS. So I'm gonna, in the next 5 minutes, me myself is gonna talk a little bit about the nutrition and the lifestyle management piece of this condition. So I have a lot to cover, and I will say that in some of the resources that we're gonna share after this webinar and at the in-person watch parties, you're gonna get a lot of what's on the slides in your hands. So don't feel like you have to capture, and I don't have to say every single word that's on the slide. This is often called the red meat allergy, right? And we're seeing that people are using that term less often because initially it was assumed it was just red meat, but we know it is so much more than that now. And really, rather than just eliminating red meat, we have to think about lots of different aspects of our lifestyle that could be contributing to AGS. So we're going to focus on heightened awareness of medications and personal care items, obviously the dietary changes that we need to make, mental health. We have one slide here, but I'm just going to emphasize the importance of thinking about mental health and like a comprehensive approach to our care. And then finally, it really kind of boils down to decreasing subsequent bites or preventing bites altogether. And so I'm going to talk about the lifestyle part, and a part of that, Hannah's going to talk about the tick stuff in just a minute. So quickly touching on medications and personal care items. This is how we found out about AGS was the cetuximab, that anti-cancer drug, and how there was a reaction. And so we know that there are several medications and clinical treatments that actually have alpha-gal that are a part of them or increase the risk of a reaction for someone who's living with the condition. This could be everything from over-the-counter medications, supplements, any types of medical treatment, such as heart valves that are derived from pigs, heparin, which is anticoagulant, antivenoms, pancreatic enzymes are also often derived from pigs as well. The gelatin that can be found in a gel cap. All of those are potential exposures or triggers for someone who have AGS. So that seems very, very overwhelming, but it's becoming more and more known, and there are more options that are becoming available. I also want to highlight personal care items. So this could be everything from toothpaste to lotion, that sunscreen that you're putting on, shaving cream, makeup. Additives are common in these personal care items that are derived from mammalian sources. So we just need to be mindful. If you have done a really good job, you feel like, of eliminating some of these trigger foods, but yet you're still seeing these reactions, or you're still having hives or itching or facial flushing, there could be other sources besides just your diet that's contributing to that. There's no way you can read this whole list. We have pulled together a list of medications, personal care items, and specific ingredients that are sometimes tricky to know whether they come from a mammal or a plant. These are within one of the handouts that you're going to receive after this webinar, just for you to have as a resource. So the dietary change, there is no cure for alpha-gal at this point. And so what we know we have to do to manage is to eliminate or remove those trigger foods. So the best form of management is removing the allergen. These foods are listed in somewhat of an order. Heather touched on this when she was talking about cofactors and things that are more likely to cause a reaction. So your red meats and your organ meats are going to be at the top. Actually, organ meats might actually have higher amounts of alpha-gal than beef or pork. So if you eat pork kidney or beef liver, those are loaded with alpha-gal. Wild game is an important consideration here. Hunting is not only just recreation, but for some people, a reliable food source across Kentucky. And so all of those foods that we're regularly hunting are mammals. And so they are going to also be a source of alpha-gal. Dairy foods were mentioned. Then other foods that are derived from mammals, such as broths, bouillon, stocks, gravies, gelatin, lard, tallow, we often are adding those to things or using those as ingredients. And then we tend to think of mammals being the source, but there's also a couple other foods that either have a molecule similar in structure to alpha-gal or they have alpha-gal themselves that we need to be mindful of. So flounder eggs, so that's a specific fish roe, actually has alpha-gal, so being mindful there. And then red algae or seaweed is loaded with carrageenan, and that is a compound that tends to elicit these same reactions and cause problems when it comes to being a trigger for some of these symptoms and reactions. Here are safe foods. These are the number one questions I get are, I feel like I can't eat anything, and how in the world do I get enough protein? And so this is just a real quick list of things that are still safe. Poultry is still on the table. And yes, some people say, I'm sick and tired of eating chicken and turkey, and I completely understand. Um, but you know what's emerging is emu and ostrich and duck and some of these other forms of poultry. Emu itself cooks and looks very similar to beef. And we're actually starting to see more emu farms that are evolving, which is a crazy thing, but it is true. So there are really good protein, high quality sources there. Seafood, eggs, beans, peas, lentils, nuts, seeds, these are all foods that we regularly encourage people to consume as a part of a balanced diet. If you still feel like you have no inspiration, you don't know what to eat, I encourage you to maybe visit your local public library, check out a cookbook that maybe is plant-based recipes or dairy-free recipes or even vegan. And it's not that you have to go vegan, but they could give you some suggestions, some ideas, elicit some creativity for how you could maybe use some of these foods that tend to be more AGS safe. Now, you could have your beloved recipe where you maybe only need to omit or replace one or two ingredients, and you can still prepare your same favorite recipe. So, for example, maybe something uses yogurt or cottage cheese. There are other plant-based yogurts available that could be an easy swap that's not going to change texture or taste. So it might just require you thinking outside the box, maybe trying a new ingredient, adding something new to your grocery list that you don't regularly purchase. Now, I put this in here for the practical application piece because, again, how do I get enough protein? My husband has alpha-gal, and we struggle to make sure that he feels like he's getting enough protein every day because he can't have those traditional mammalian foods. I get that. So I wanted to actually pull together kind of what a menu could look like for someone to show that it is possible to have high quality protein foods and meet protein needs in a day. So here, say we have a 200-pound man. He needs approximately 73 grams of protein each day. And this is a calculation that you can do to determine how much protein you need. And so I just kind of threw in some more common foods that could be accessible in some of our rural communities, thinking about what grocery stores are available. And essentially, looking at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, a couple snacks were over 100 grams of protein when his needs were 73. So this includes some turkey sausage, some scrambled eggs, looking at whole grain toast and maybe instead of a white toast, tuna salad and crackers, having a nice grilled chicken breast and roasted veggies for dinner with some rice. So just to kind of show you it is possible. It does seem overwhelming, but small changes, you really can meet your nutrient and protein needs. Heather alluded to the fact you kind of have to be a label detective, and that's the truth. Someone even made a comment about how can we make it more clear when an ingredient is from an animal or a plant? And yes, that is a concern and something that we kind of have to figure out. So additives on the panel don't disclose their source. Unfortunately, a lot of foods might be labeled things like non-dairy, but that doesn't mean that dairy is actually not still a part of it. Vegan is often used, but it does need to have like a third party review to be certified vegan. Just something being called vegan doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a mammalian based ingredient in that food. The other thing is you might feel like you have it figured out. You know what are your safe foods, your safe brands, what packaged and processed foods that you can tolerate. The thing is, food manufacturers can change their ingredients list without giving notice to a consumer. So it is helpful to regularly check that, give it a glance to see if anything has changed, because even though it's safe this month, and next month, in a year, it might not necessarily be. So just ensure that you are being mindful of that ingredients list, looking at those additives. Again, we have resources that kind of list out what those additives are, of concern are. Here is just a list of foods, products, and ingredients that may contain alpha-gal. It again depends on how they're prepared. So even though we're saying, hey, we need to eliminate mammalian-based foods, well, you'll see things on here that don't come from mammals, like jelly beans or marshmallows. But again, that's the ingredient. It's the gelatin or the glycerin in it that actually could be the concern. I do want to point out dietary supplements really quick. This is an important topic for you to have with your healthcare provider, even a pharmacist. If you're in a rural community, most communities do have a pharmacy where you can ask those questions. Ideally, working with a registered dietitian is your best bet. We don't have any studies that show people who have AGS actually have some or have nutrient are more prone to a nutrient deficiency, which is a good thing. But we do have a lot of people ask if they should take a multivitamin, a multimineral supplement to fill nutrient gaps. If you are drastically changing your diet, it might be a nice temporary solution while you try to adjust and figure out what works for you. But at this point, it doesn't seem like it is a necessity or highly recommended. Now, some individuals who choose to go fully vegan after a diagnosis, I do want to be mindful of specific nutrients such as vitamin B12, vitamin D, iron, calcium, zinc. These are nutrients that you can talk to your healthcare provider about. You can run tests to see if you're low or deficient, but that is an additional a point of conversation that you could have with the provider. And then the other thing I want to point out is supplements. We need to be mindful. A lot of them are gel caps or a powder. And so they could be made in a way that there is an alpha-gal allergen in them. So being mindful of the type of supplement that you're taking. I have a couple more slides. We'll keep moving on. I want to mention a few food considerations. So first of all is fruits and vegetables. So I mentioned those are on that safe list, but actually many fruits and vegetables you find in the grocery store, one of the reasons they last so long is they might have a coating that's applied to preserve freshness. Some of those coatings are mammalian derived. So even though it's a safe food, we always encourage people to rinse, just under some running cool water, your fruits and vegetables before you eat them or chop them. So we just want to be sure that we're implementing some of those standard food safety practices, and that's going to decrease the likelihood of you having any type of potential reaction. Cooking. So Heather mentioned cross-contamination is a growing concern. We're starting to see and hear more and more about that. Cooking doesn't destroy this sugar, and so that doesn't mean that's going to fix or remove that food allergen. We need to be mindful of fumes, even touching packaging. Maybe you do the primary grocery shopping and you grab people in your family still have mammalian-based food. So you grab a package of bacon out of the grocery bag, you touch that plastic that's wrapping the bacon and stick it in the fridge, and then you realize, oh, my hand might be a little itchy. That we're starting to hear and see stories about that. So just being mindful of little things in your kitchen that could potentially be causing a reaction. And then we want to think about food logs. It seems like a lot of work, but it might actually be helpful in identifying some hidden triggers. You can use this in conversations to ask questions, whether you're talking to a healthcare provider or registered dietitian, to try to get to the root cause of maybe it is still dairy that you've got in your diet that needs to be removed, just to try to see if it helps alleviate some of your triggers. The last piece that I have is about mental health. I do a lot of work with diabetes and heart disease, and there is a lot of, it's heavy when you have to manage a chronic health condition and think about your food choices all the time. And so I just want to acknowledge that mental health is just as important as your physical health when it comes to your alpha-gal management. You could have a whole host of feelings, overwhelm, feeling isolated, being frustrated, and even feelings of grief, like anticipatory grief of like, oh, I can't eat those foods at that barbecue that I go to every year, or maybe even hopelessness if you don't know how to turn. So I just want to share peer support, the number of different Facebook groups that are out there, community groups, online groups, they can be incredibly uplifting and helpful for providing food suggestions or ideas or recipes or products that someone has found that's AGS safe. So look for peer support. Professional support, it is totally normal and a good thing for you to look into mental health care providers to help you navigate and walk through a diagnosis like AGS. That could be a counselor, a licensed social worker, a psychologist. Even some healthcare providers are trained to provide cognitive behavior therapy and acceptance therapy. Maybe that's what you need to work through, and that is okay. And I hope you feel encouraged to reach out and get that support if you need it. And then finally, the self-care piece. There are things we can do to make ourselves feel better. That could be gratitude practices, just focusing on sleep habits, joyful movement, hobbies, journaling. Those small things actually can make a tremendous difference in your overview and how you feel like you can actually manage the condition over time. So here, before we move forward, I know we're after 7 o'clock. We still got some good information to share, about 10 to 15 or 5 to 10 more minutes. But do you feel better equipped to identify potential triggers that could be a part of your diet, medications, personal care? I would love to know. And those resources you're going to receive are actually going to give you even more information and support that you can rely on as well. All right, we have a few people that have responded. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move into our last little bit. I think it's about 5, 10 minutes. I'm going to hand it over to Hannah Tiffin, our other entomologist, and she's going to talk about tick bite prevention.
All right. Hey there, you all. Thanks for sticking with us for this. And I hope you're able to stay around for the next portion of it where we'll go through your Q&A questions and try to get you guys some answers. So the other panelists and experts on this presentation did an excellent job of going over this syndrome and all the different varieties of symptoms and signs that are associated with it, that it comes from ticks, all of that. And I'm here to say that you don't need to panic if you don't already have it. There are ways to prevent this syndrome. And there's ways to prevent ticks and tick bites across the board because, as I'm sure many of you are aware, tick bites aren't just associated with one thing. It's not just alpha-gal. Even just the Lone Star tick can transmit other pathogens that can cause other diseases. So when we're trying to think of limiting our risk with alpha-gal and getting alpha-gal, or, if you already have it, decreasing your risk of increasing your sensitization, ooh, that's a hard word to say, to increasing your numbers, like Heather Shaw was talking about, we want to decrease our risk of getting tick bites across the board. So I'm going to introduce a couple different tactics you can use in trying to prevent getting tick bites. And these are all going to be part of this kind of paradigm that revolves around being bite safe. So you want to think of your behaviors, so using behaviors to avoid tick bites and reducing your risk of tick bites, identifying your risks so you know when you're in areas that are more at risk, and what you can do to kind of lower your risk in those areas, and using a variety of tools and tactics, so not just relying on one tool because we want to use different types when we're in different locations. And then I'll end with some environmental management of how we can reduce ticks around our home and our property. Okay, so first and foremost is personal protection. When we're thinking of tick bites, and really when we're thinking of any kind of vector-borne disease, so tick bites and mosquito bites and fly bites, we want to think of our personal protection, wearing like long layers so that you're preventing ticks from getting onto you and preventing ticks from biting you. So that's long pants, long sleeves, wearing tall boots, especially if you're in very brushy areas. And then also, changing your behaviors when you're in more tick risky areas, such as staying to the middle of trails. So tick risky areas are these kind of areas I like to call that they look a little bit more wild. And I'm not saying, don't go out there and enjoy, the outdoors. I'm an outdoors girl. I love being outside. This is a picture of my dog. You're going to see him and my other dog a lot of times throughout the rest of these slides, and they're in tick habitat. So as my husband likes to say, he'll point out and say, like, oh, that looks tick risky. And it sure does. So I'm not saying you can't enjoy these things. I'm saying, this is where we identify our risks and we use our behaviors and our tools available to lower that risk. So in situations like that, we want to be wearing light colored clothing. This is not because it'll prevent ticks from getting on us, but it just helps with being able to see ticks when they are on us. using those long layers, using DEET or a similar repellent. You can also treat your clothing beforehand with permethrin. It comes in this big yellow bottle. It's something I really like to use. So if you're out and about and you forgot the DEET, you're still protected because you have that treated clothing. And then doing tick checks while you're out and about, but also when you get back home on yourself, your loved ones, your family pets. You can do that in the shower so that you're dislodging any ticks that may be on you before they bite. And it also gives you a better way to do a tick check. And then throwing your clothes in a hot dryer that will dry out and kill ticks. So real quick, there is this great tool that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has available for finding repellent that'll work for you for mosquitoes and or for ticks. So if you just take out your camera, grab a quick little picture of this, or you can just Google EPA, find a repellent right for you. You can go through this and find a repellent that works for you and your family. We also want to reduce tick risky areas where we're hanging out for people. So again, I'm not saying you need to go and do this across your entire property, especially if you own a farm or a ranch, but focusing on areas where we're spending the most amount of time or where our family, our kids, our pets are spending the most amount of time. We want to trim and manage vegetation, so limiting those brushy areas that ticks like to hang out in, cleaning up that leaf litter, mowing the grass so it's a little bit shorter. Something that I hope you take away from this is that I'm hoping you'll start thinking like a tick. So ticks dry out really easily. And so they like to be in those brushier environments. They like to be under those leaves. They like the taller grass because that helps protect them from drying out. It also gives them ample opportunity to climb onto a host, like an animal or you. So you want to limit those types of opportunities for ticks where you're spending the most amount of time. And then we're going to do the same thing for animals. So for our livestock, again, not saying that you need to mow all of your pastures all the time, but just mow them right before you're rotating stock into them or, on a relatively consistent schedule so that you have less tick risky areas near your animals. We also want to reduce contact between animals and tick habitat. So for instance, I have this photo of this horse here where you can see all this kind of brushy vegetation falling into her pen. And so you want to limit that kind of areas on your property by either adding additional fences, trimming the vegetation, trimming away the brush, or in this next slide, I'll show you adding these barriers. So you can add a buffer or a barrier to your property as well, where that is what it remains like mowed or bushwhacked during the season. And that creates a more difficult habitat for ticks to thrive in, but it also limits how many mice or other type of wildlife might be getting onto your property because it makes a higher risk for a mouse to go across these open pastures, right? So by creating a barrier between the wilder zones on your property and where your animals or where you are hanging out, you're creating a kind of barrier from the ticks and also from the smaller mammals that might be carrying ticks into your property and they may be more adverse to crossing that type of habitat. Okay, real quick, when we talk about domestic pet prevention products, I am not a veterinarian, so you need to talk to your veterinarian about this and your pets. But it's really important to keep your pets up to date on their vaccines and their anti-tick and anti-mosquito prevention drugs. So I will say that for my animals, they get, the monthly chewable anti-tick, anti-mosquito medication. But when I lived in Pennsylvania, our house backed up to a really forested areas. And I love taking my dogs out for hikes, as you saw in those other photos. And so with the product they were on, it required the tick to bite my dog in order to die, which meant that they were still bringing in live ticks into my house. And so that's when I had to, weigh some risks and come up with some different tactics, right? So I added the Seresto collar, which you can see in this picture. It's just that little gray collar, and that adds another layer of protection for my animals. So these are things to kind of keep in mind. There's a bunch of different options available. Talk to your veterinarian about them. Real quick, I'm not going to go into any in-depth detail on this. This could be a whole other presentation on its own. But treating your livestock animals is also really important when you're thinking about tick and fly and mosquito treatment and preventing diseases in your animals. This little QR code will take you to a tool that will help you select pesticides. You can go through and select what type of animal you have, what reproductive status they're in, the type of facility you have, and what pest you're trying to prevent. And then it's going to give you a list of different products as well as their modes of action. And so it's really important that you're rotating between different modes of action so that you're reducing the risk of resistance in your chemicals. So that list is really helpful. You can just rotate through that. When you're doing a tick check, again, this is another great time to think like a tick. You want to be somewhere that's protected, that's safe, and that you have an easy access to blood meal. So somewhere like behind your ears, because I can't see that very well. They can latch in, and then the skin there is really thin, so they can easily get a blood meal because they don't have to go through any kind of thickened skin, right? So we're thinking behind the ears, in between the belly, in the belly button. I promise you, I've heard from people that have had ticks in their belly button. As disgusting as that is, check that. Armpits, behind the legs, your groin. This is going to be the same on your animals as well. So again, think of those safe places for a tick that they can get an easy blood meal. And so that includes under the tail as well. Removing a tick, this video doesn't work here, but essentially what you're going to do is pull the skin as tight as possible. And you're going to grab as close to the skin as possible and pull straight up. None of this twisting and turning that I often hear about. That can break the tick in half, and you want to remove the whole thing. You don't leave any mouth parts behind. You also want to try to remove it as close to the skin as possible so that you're not squeezing on essentially its stomach. You don't want it to regurgitate anything that it already has in its guts back into you. So you're trying to get as close to the skin as possible and remove the entire thing just in one swipe essentially. And so another thing you can do is being prepared when you're out and about. So you can bring your own tick kit. You can have all these different things that I have pictured here, but if you're just trying to remove a tick and be safe that way, and you are not planning to get it identified or pathogen tested, then all you need is a pair of tweezers and some hand sanitizer or, an alcohol prep pad. So something where you can clean your hands beforehand and then clean the bite wound after you remove the tick. Okay, and you can keep this. I didn't realize that slide had been added, but you can keep that anywhere with you. You can put it in your bag, your backpack, keep it in the barn, wherever you need it. And so, in summary, all of those different tools and tactics are great. We want to be considering a whole variety of tools available to us. And we also want to be focusing in on our behaviors. So staying to the middle of the trails, wearing those long sleeves, and weighing the different risks that may be present at different times during the day, different places where we're spending time and all of that. And then using environmental management when we're, trying to reduce our risk of tick bites at home or on our property. All right. And so our last Mentimeter question, right? Okay. Yeah. So our last Mentimeter question, which two of the strategies that we talked about today will be most useful to you for preventing tick bites? And so this is an open-ended one. So you got to write those in. And then I believe once you write them in, you'll be able to vote on them. I've never used that part of Mentimeter before, so we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so Insect Shield, I've used them before. Again, no actual endorsements from us or anything, but they're a really good company that can provide permethrin treated clothing. You can also send in your clothing for them to treat. This looks great, guys. These are all good tactics to use. The long pants especially are really helpful in preventing tick bites, or at least being able to see them before they get on you.
Thank you, Hannah. That's helpful for light colored clothing, even thinking about my kids of how I can help protect them as well, and thinking like a tick. That's super
Exactly, yeah.
helpful. All right. So we're going to move into the question answer session portion now. And we have probably 100 questions that have been answered. There are some consistent ones throughout. We're going to kind of rapid fire through them. I think we can quickly address several of them with some pretty straightforward answers. I do like this managing AGS slide just because it kind of puts everything we've talked about tonight into four broader buckets. So thinking about what are the immediate dietary and lifestyle changes that might need to be made? How can we be prepared and safe medically? Making that appointment with an allergist, buying a medical bracelet, and having medical details in your phone. Maybe those are things you haven't really thought of before, especially if you have severe reactions. That's super helpful. Exploring alternatives, new foods, new recipes, and then that long-term management and support. It really kind of boils down to using those tick bite prevention strategies to prevent subsequent bites or any future bites that you might have. So I'm going to leave this slide up here for now. It is extension and it's a webinar and we taught you things. So we would love for you to take 2-3 minutes to complete our evaluation. If you are watching and joining us from home, you can just scan that QR code. It'll take you directly to an online survey you can quickly complete while we're answering some questions. If you are at an in-person watch party, follow the guidance from your county office staff. They might have you completing that survey on paper. So you want to follow their directions. So while I leave that up, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing some of these questions that we've gotten throughout, and I'm going to kind of tag team our panelists to answer them, maybe as briefly as possible and in a really short response. So Heather Shaw, I'm going to put you on first because we've gotten the question of, can AGS go away?
Okay, so can you hear me still?
Yep.
Just want to check that. Okay. So while there is no cure for alpha-gal syndrome, we do have a possibility of going into remission. Right now, I think I said this earlier, about 10% of people after a couple of years into diagnosis have reported being in remission. Keep in mind, if you get another tick bite, it's likely to bring you out of remission. So this is not a one-time thing. You could go in and out of remission over your lifetime. It likely will not be cured or treated, but remission is a possibility. Not everyone will go in remission. I'm at year 10 that I know of. Like I said, I think it's longer than that. And so I'm still not in remission, hopefully soon, but yeah, it's a possibility.
Thank you so much. Jonathan, here's another one. You could probably talk about this for 30 minutes, but
Oh, I
why
can?
is it that alpha-gal seems to become so common now? That it's kind of exploded? It seems like it's come out of nowhere when ticks have been around for the history of humans.
Ticks have been around for a long time. Absolutely true. I would say that some of this is partially an artifact of greater awareness, greater reporting, better understanding of what's happening. So those numbers are going to go up, just like we see with other sort of quote unquote new diseases and new problems. Those numbers are going to go up because we start to diagnose it more and be more aware of it. There is the possibility also that the Lone Star tick having its range expand from where it's historically been, if it's the tick most that's going to be most associated with it forever here in Kentucky and the US, as it gets more common, that could also contribute to the spread. I would say that it's those two things kind of playing together that have resulted in this situation.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another one while I've got you.
Yes.
So, this is a question that's come up. They're all kind of related. Are there any other sources for getting alpha-gal other than tick bites? Can you contract it without being bitten by a tick? Is it possible by just consuming the meat?
As far as we understand currently, no, this is a tick-borne situation. You're not going to pass it from family member to family member. It's not going to be passed by dietary consumption of red meat. We've eaten red meat and consumed red meat products for a long time. And so I don't think that there's ever going to be a chance of that happening. That would be a different, I think, exposure scenario and a different type of allergy. Alpha-gal syndrome, as we understand it, is a tick-borne issue.
Thank you so much. So this might be the most commonly asked question that I saw was regarding acupuncture as a cure. And we did not bring that up in the dietary or lifestyle modification slides, but I will 100% kind of share what the research says. So is there any research supporting acupuncture as a treatment or cure for alpha-gal. So there are a couple of studies out there that are being widely promoted that have relatively small sample sizes that show that a specific type of acupuncture called Solomon auricular allergy treatment, or SAAT, can be beneficial for reducing the severity of symptoms. So essentially what you're doing is you're inserting a microneedle into your ear and you leave it there for a few weeks at a time. So that is what that actual treatment is. Um, in some cases, people have gone into remission. We don't have evidence. There's no science that shows that this is a cure. It is also not a standard treatment or standard practice that is recommended by healthcare providers or allergists for it at this time. Um, there are a growing number of instances where we say it's remission because people who have this treatment may go into remission, but it seems that with repeated exposure to an allergen, that those symptoms, those side effects, the reactions reoccur, and sometimes they can be more severe than they were before the treatment. So maybe you didn't necessarily experience anaphylaxis before, but going into remission, it almost creates a false sense of security. So that you really need to be mindful of that if you do try that treatment, that it isn't a cure and that you still do need to be careful. There's also a little bit of science that is actually showing us that some people it doesn't work at all. And for some people, it actually can make symptoms worse. So again, that's kind of where the science stands. We really do need a bit more evidence before we can make some broader generalizations or recommendations to the general public about acupuncture. Okay, so hopefully that addressed that one. Okay, Heather Shaw, here's one for you. How often should someone be tested for alpha-gal?
So normally allergists, I think, recommend 1 year. My allergist is a yearly thing. It really just depends on the allergist, and some of it also depends on your number. And so if you have a super high number and it's not likely you're going to go into remission or be at zero anytime soon, they're probably going to wait a year. Also for insurance purposes. Maybe if you're a super low number and they talk to you and work through your case and think you might go out of remission before a year, they may want to check you. So just a good question for your doctor.
Perfect, thank you. Let's see. Jonathan, I have one for you. Can I test a tick to see if it is positive for alpha-gal if I collect one and save one?
I'm going to tag Hannah in on this as well, Dr. Tiffin in on this. My understanding is that no, you are unlikely to be able to test the tick. You can test yourself later on and do those things that have been discussed this evening. But as far as I understand it, your best bet would be to have the tick identified and to verify that it is a Lone Star tick. Hannah, do you want to tag in on that?
Yep, totally in agreement. There is no current test for the tick itself, but knowing what the Lone Star looks like with how Jonathan described earlier in the presentation, and you can work with your extension office to see what kind of identification services they may offer. And they're always, happy to reach out to us for identification services as well at the entomology department at UK.
Perfect. I'm glad you mentioned that because that was going to be the next question is can I have a tick identified to know if it's Lone Star? But yes, there are some mechanisms in place to help with that.
Yes.
There are lots of tick cards out there as well that you can carry in a wallet or in a purse. We talked about the tick kit. I think those would be helpful, and we're working on one through Kentucky. So hopefully you'll see some of those out and about here in the next couple of months or so.
Okay,
Let's hope so.
So we have about 3 minutes left on our time. I'm going to again encourage people who are still with us to complete that program evaluation. This next question also came up often in the chat, and I'll be sure to address it. And while I do, I would love to encourage the other hosts or panelists to look at the Q&A and see if there's maybe one more question we can address after this. So the question was, can you donate blood when you have alpha-gal syndrome? Obviously, that's being an incredible citizen and supporter and neighbor by donating blood. And yes, you may donate blood if you meet all of the eligibility criteria that is required to donate blood. So alpha-gal syndrome is different than, malaria or some of these other conditions that we are considered infectious diseases that come from pests. So it cannot be spread through blood or any other bodily fluids. That means you can't give someone alpha-gal through donated blood when it is used in a blood transfusion. Now, if you have alpha-gal yourself and you're receiving a blood transfusion, you do need to let healthcare providers know. This has to kind of do with how blood is processed, um, uh, or that B antigen that might be present. So this is something you want your healthcare team to be aware of. If you were to receive, now, if you're in a circumstance where you need a blood transfusion, you might not be able to communicate that. So this is where having a medical bracelet or having that medical information in your phone would be super helpful. If you do need to receive an emergency blood transfusion, maybe there are pre-medications or pre-treatments, precautions that can be taken to reduce any severe reactions that you might have, ensuring that you get that blood transfusion that you need. Hopefully that answered that question decent. Okay, we have 1 minute. Is there anything else you feel like we've covered some of the big ones? Okay.
Where can people go, Heather, for the lifestyle management piece? Can they go to UK Extension and go to your department to find all that
Yes,
information?
absolutely. So if you go to your local Cooperative Extension office right there, you can ask the staff for resources on alpha-gal and they can find them for you. It is a publicly available publication on the UK Cooperative Extension publication website. So you could go in and search alpha-gal and you will pull up all those publications that we have. It's available in that way. It will be emailed directly to everyone who registered for this webinar and also is available to all of the individuals who are participating in their extension office right now. So great question. We are at time. It is 7:30. We just talked at you for 90 minutes. I'm hoping that there was some little bits, nuggets of information that were super helpful for you. You will hear from us next week. We'll follow up with a link to the recording as well as all the reference resources. And you will have a direct way to reach out to us if you need us in any other way. We have all the questions that we didn't address, and we apologize we weren't able to get to them. It's super helpful, though, to see what you're thinking, because again, that can inform the future work that Extension does, the resources and the curriculum that we pull together for you. Thank you for spending 90 minutes on a Thursday night with us. We wish you the best. We appreciate you completing the survey, and hopefully we will see you around at a future Extension program. So thank you and have a good night.